There's something haunting about places that were once alive, where laughter turned to echoes and silence now breathes through broken walls. Abandoned buildings remember. The air grows colder, shadows linger longer, and every step feels watched. These places aren't empty. They're waiting, whispering stories the living were never meant to hear. So tonight, we're stepping into the forgotten. 10 abandoned places with horror stories that defy time and logic. And if you think you've seen fear before, wait till you hear what happened inside the Whispering Asylum. Deep in the forested outskirts of Maine lies an old psychiatric hospital that locals call the Whispering Asylum. It was built in the late 1800s, when mental illness was misunderstood and treatment was cruel. The walls once echoed with screams and murmurs, a place where fear was part of the therapy. After it closed in 1962, nature began reclaiming it. Trees grew through broken windows, vines crawled up the patient wards, and silence slowly swallowed what was left. But silence, they say, never truly settled there. Urban explorers, thrill seekers, and paranormal investigators all came to see what stories were true. Some left shaken, some refused to speak of what they saw, and a few never came back at all. The story begins with what remained: rusted bed frames, decaying files, and hallways that bent unnaturally, as if the building itself was shifting under invisible weight. The main hall still carried faint scratch marks on the walls, hundreds of them, some spelling nothing, others forming names no one could trace. But the strangest part was the sound. Every explorer reported it differently. Some said it was whispering, some said it was breathing. Others claimed it was their own voice echoing back, but twisted. When recordings were taken, the audio always carried faint, overlapping murmurs, as though dozens of unseen mouths were speaking from the walls. Inside the basement, an old therapy room still existed, chains bolted into the floor, a single steel chair, a cracked mirror facing it, and carved into that mirror faintly but unmistakably the words, "Still listening." Those who entered the basement felt an unnatural pressure on their chest, as if the air thickened around them. The deeper they went, the heavier it became. Some felt their ears pop. Some heard faint laughter, but no one ever found the source. In 1997, a documentary crew spent one night there. Their goal was simple: to record the paranormal evidence and debunk the myths. What they captured instead was never aired. The raw footage, later leaked online in fragments, showed their cameras glitching each time they entered the patient block. Their thermal sensors picked up sudden cold spots forming in humanoid shapes, and their microphones picking whispers that seemed to say their own names. By dawn, one of the crew members was missing. The rest left in panic, abandoning their gear. The police later found the missing cameraman near the woods, disoriented, barefoot, and repeating a single phrase. "They're still talking." He never recovered fully. He lost his ability to sleep without hearing murmurs. Locals tried to demolish the asylum in 2003, but the first demolition team refused to continue. Their heavy equipment kept malfunctioning every time they tried to tear down the eastern wing. Excavators jammed, drills cracked, and the foreman swore the walls were breathing. Eventually, the project was abandoned entirely. Now the asylum stands untouched, shrouded in fog and silence. People still drive past it sometimes. Some say at night you can see a dim light flickering in the top floor window, as if someone's still there, watching. Others say if you stop your car and turn off your engine, you'll hear it faint, like a soft choir of voices whispering from the darkness, just beneath your heartbeat. And those who listen too long never seem to sleep peacefully again. If this story has already sent chills down your spine, our next tale will take you even deeper into the darkness, to a whole town swallowed by time, where the ground itself burns and the air tastes like ash. If the Whispering Asylum haunted the mind, then Centralia haunts the earth itself. There's no need to imagine what hell might look like, because somewhere in Pennsylvania, it already burns beneath your feet. Centralia was once an ordinary coal mining town. Rows of small houses lined the streets, The smell of iron and smoke hung in the air, and the rhythm of life was steady. Families lived here for generations, proud of the town they built above the rich veins of anthracite coal. But in May of 1962, a fire meant to clean a garbage pit spread into an abandoned coal mine and never went out. What began as a simple accident turned into a nightmare that consumed the town for decades. At first, no one understood what was happening. Smoke began seeping through the cracks in the streets, rising like breath from the earth itself. The smell of sulfur grew stronger, the ground became warm to the touch, and small sinkholes began appearing, some belching toxic gas, others collapsing entirely. The fire had reached the mines below Centralia, spreading through the coal seams like veins of burning blood. It's said that once you walk through Centralia, you can feel the ground pulse faintly under your boots, as if the earth is alive, angry, and suffering. Residents tried to stay. They thought it would pass, but the fire spread deeper, hotter, unstoppable. Houses caught fire from beneath, basements filled with smoke. Children fainted from carbon monoxide poisoning in their sleep. By the time the government stepped in, it was too late. The fire had spread over 8 miles underground, and temperatures near the core reached over 1,000 degrees. The evacuation began slowly. Some left crying, others refused to abandon their homes. Years passed, and Centralia transformed from a town into an open wound. Pavement cracked apart like dry skin. Road lines melted away. Steam rose continuously, carrying the stench of burning rock. It looked like the surface of another planet, lifeless, scorched, and whispering. But what makes Centralia more than a tragedy is what came after the living left. Those who have walked through it, the few who dare, speak of more than heat and smoke. They speak of voices carried by the wind, whispers rising from the cracks in the ground. Some swear they've seen faint silhouettes moving through the haze, too tall, too thin, too slow to be human. And sometimes, through the mist, they hear the distant rumble of machinery, the echo of mining drills that stopped decades ago. One explorer described the strangest sensation, as if footsteps followed him exactly, always one beat behind. When he turned, nothing but heat shimmered behind him. When he reached his car, the footprints he left behind had filled with thin ribbons of smoke, as though the ground itself was exhaling. Centralia's graveyard still stands on the hill above the ruins. The tombstones are cracked, the grass long dead, and the crosses coated in soot. On cold mornings, smoke drifts from between the graves, and the earth feels hot even in winter. Some locals say you can sometimes hear faint hammering from beneath the soil, the miners who never escaped the fire, still working their eternal shift underground. There's a strange phenomenon too. Digital cameras often malfunction in Centralia. Batteries drain rapidly, lenses fog instantly, and footage records bursts of static. Photographers claim faces sometimes appear in the smoke, twisted outlines that vanish the moment you blink. Scientists say it's just the gases and heat distortion, but those who have felt it know better. They know that Centralia doesn't want to be documented. It doesn't want to be remembered. It just wants to burn. The highway that once ran through it, Route 61, was shut down years ago. The asphalt cracked open in long, jagged scars, and graffiti now covers it. Some of its colorful, hopeful hearts, wings, messages of love. But mixed among them are strange symbols, words in no known language, painted in red. Nobody knows who made them or why. At night, the air trembles with a low hum, deep, rhythmic, like distant machinery or chanting. And in that hum, some swear they hear names over and over, whispered through the heat. A few people still live near the edges of Centralia, the last holdouts, those who refused to leave even when the government declared the town condemned. They live quietly, keeping their windows shut tight. When asked why they stayed, one old man said, "Because someone has to keep the fire company." Centralia has no schools, no stores, no churches anymore. Only smoke, ash, and echoes. But at night, when the mist glows faintly orange and the horizon flickers like a heartbeat, you can almost see the outlines of what used to be a ghost town burning not in memory, but in reality. And as long as the fire keeps feeding on the coal, Centralia will live, a living tomb that refuses to cool down. The last town on Earth where hell isn't below, it's right here. If this story made you feel the ground tremble beneath your imagination, then be prepared. Because our next tale takes you somewhere colder, somewhere where time itself froze. A grand hotel buried in snow and silence, where every clock stopped ticking on the same night. There's a kind of silence that only exists in snow, soft, suffocating, endless. It buries sound, memory, even time. And somewhere in the frozen wilderness of northern Canada, there's a hotel where silence became eternal. The Grand St. Aurelian Hotel was once the pride of its region, a towering luxury retreat built in the 1920s, tucked deep within the Laurentian Mountains. Surrounded by pines and frozen lakes, it was a place where the wealthy came to escape the noise of the world. They came for winter festivals, ice galas, and the promise of isolation wrapped in comfort. For decades, laughter and music filled its grand ballroom, chandeliers glowing, fireplaces roaring, snowflakes drifting past the tall glass windows. Then one winter, it all stopped. It began during the storm of 1957, a blizzard so violent it erased entire roads and buried towns under drifts higher than rooftops. The Grand Hotel, isolated deep in the woods, was cut off completely. Radio signals faded. Roads vanished beneath tons of snow. Inside, guests were trapped. Dozens of them, families, musicians, staff. No one could leave and no help could reach them. For weeks, nothing was heard from the hotel. The storm passed, but when rescue teams finally broke through the snow, the Grand St. Aurelian was nothing but a frozen monument, its tall frame encased in glittering ice, doors sealed shut, windows frosted over like blind eyes. When they forced their way inside, they found everything untouched, tables still set for dinner, glasses frozen mid-toast, coats hanging neatly by the lobby door. But not a single person remained. No footprints in the snow, no signs of struggle. Just silence, thick and total, as though the hotel had swallowed everyone whole. Even stranger were the clocks. Every one of them, from the grand lobby clock to the smallest wristwatch left behind, had stopped at exactly 2:14. The same minute, the same second. Investigators were baffled. There was food still on the tables, wine half poured, candles burned down to stubs. Yet no trace of human presence, not even bodies. It was as if, in one moment, everyone simply vanished. Over the years, theories piled up: carbon monoxide poisoning, avalanche collapse, mass hypothermia. But none explained why every clock stopped. None explained why even the fireplaces, which should have burned out long before, were found full of unburned wood, encased in ice as though the flames had frozen mid-dance. Locals avoided the area afterward. Hunters said their dogs refused to go near the grounds. Pilots flying overhead claimed they saw faint lights in the hotel windows at night, soft, golden glows flickering between the curtains. But when rescue parties checked, the place was always dark. In the late 1970s, an expedition team from Montreal decided to document the hotel's ruins. They arrived in early winter, cameras ready, expecting decay and snow. What they found was impossible. Inside, the hotel had barely aged. The wallpaper was pristine. The furniture stood untouched. Dust was minimal, as if it had been cleaned recently. And yet, everything was coated in a thin, translucent layer of frost, shimmering under their flashlights like glass skin. The team reported a steady temperature of 22 degrees C, even though their instruments outside read 5. Something in the air inside the hotel made it colder than the world around it. One explorer, a man named Etienne, noted that he kept hearing soft music echoing faintly, an old waltz, distant and fading, though no speakers or instruments were anywhere to be found. Another swore he saw footprints forming in the frost on the ballroom floor, delicate, like someone was dancing, even though the air was still. They stayed one night, only one. The next morning, they left without finishing their report. The lead researcher, when interviewed years later, simply said, "Some places are frozen because the world forgot them. That one froze because it remembered too much." After that, no one tried to reopen or restore the Grand Hotel. The path leading to it became overgrown, the sign buried under snowdrifts, and maps eventually stopped marking its location. But in the stillness of northern nights, travelers sometimes claim to see the faint outline of the hotel's spire glowing blue through the fog, as if catching moonlight from another time. Those who have ventured close describe a strange sensation, a deep, penetrating cold that seeps past clothing and skin, straight into bone. Their breath fogs differently there, slower, thicker, like the air itself moves at half speed. Cameras freeze instantly. Batteries drain. Some even say they see reflections in the frosted windows, not their own, but faces smiling faintly, dressed in old-fashioned suits and gowns, caught mid-dance, mid-laugh, forever preserved in ice. The Grand St. Aurelian stands untouched to this day. Its ballroom is said to still gleam in moonlight, chandeliers dripping icicles like tears, a frozen orchestra waiting for music that will never play again. And sometimes, on the coldest nights of the year, if you stand in the woods and listen closely, you can hear it, faint waltz music drifting through the pines, echoing across the frozen lake, repeating endlessly at the same tempo, the same rhythm. Just as it did at 2:14 a.m., the nighttime itself froze. If this story made you shiver, then hold on, because our next one doesn't freeze, it feeds. A decaying amusement park where laughter never truly stopped. It only changed into something hungry. There's something unsettling about amusement parks when they're empty. The laughter gone, the music silent, the rides motionless, like a party that never ended but everyone forgot to attend. And deep in the countryside of Louisiana, one such carnival still stands, faded, rusted, and strangely alive. Locals call it the Carnival of Shadows. It opened in 1965, built on the swampy outskirts of Baton Rouge. Bright lights, cotton candy, the smell of popcorn and oil, a place of wonder for families across the state. But from the beginning, there was something off about it. Accidents were frequent. A child vanished near the Ferris wheel just weeks after opening. A maintenance worker was found in the funhouse, crushed between mirrors that had somehow shifted in the night. The park owner, a man named Vincent Harlow, called them coincidences, unfortunate but natural. Yet the locals whispered, the land itself didn't want to be disturbed. The carnival was built on an old plantation site, one that burned to the ground in 1899 under mysterious circumstances. The earth beneath it was dark, soft, and constantly damp, as if still trying to swallow everything above it. By 1972, the park shut down. The rides rusted, the music faded, and the swamp reclaimed what was left, creeping vines choking the ticket booths, murky water swallowing the carousel horses, the Ferris wheel half sunk and tilted toward the trees like a skeletal moon. But the Carnival of Shadows never really died. People still hear it. At night, when the fog rolls in from the bayou, locals claim the faint sound of a carousel organ drifts across the water, warped, slow, but unmistakable. Some say the lights flicker on for just a few minutes, a faint orange glow pulsing through the mist like fireflies circling the ruins. And sometimes the laughter returns. Not joyful laughter, but distant, layered wrong. Too many voices, echoing from nowhere. In 1985, a group of teenagers dared each other to camp inside the park. They set up near the carousel, telling ghost stories until midnight. One of them recorded a tape, fragments of laughter, faint creaks of metal, the wind moving through the rides. Around 2 a.m., they heard the carousel creak and begin to turn slow at first, then faster, even though the machinery was long dead. The horses moved, their glass eyes glinting in the dark. Only 3 of the 5 teenagers returned home. The others were never found. Police reports said the swamp had possibly swallowed them. But the tape, recovered from the site, told another story. The last sounds were screams, followed by carnival music slowing down until it stopped completely. Years later, explorers and thrill-seekers ventured in, hoping to capture proof of the supernatural. They found strange footprints in the mud barefoot, adult-sized, yet leading in circles. In the funhouse, mirrors stood cracked and warped, reflecting dozens of figures even when only one person stood in front of them. Some explorers claimed their reflections didn't move when they did. And in the ticket booth, carved into the wood, were words barely visible under layers of mold and grime. The show never ended. As the years passed, nature consumed more of the carnival, but certain parts refused to decay. The carousel, the Ferris wheel, and the funhouse mirrors. They remained intact, gleaming faintly even through the swamp fog, as if polished by unseen hands. Local fishermen who cross near the area at night swear they see figures wandering through the mist, silhouettes moving in circles, flickering in and out like candlelight. Some appear small, childlike. Others tall, elongated, their faces hidden in shadow. And if you listen closely, they say, you can still hear the announcer's faint voice drifting through the reeds. Step right up. What makes the carnival truly horrifying isn't just its past. It's what happens to those who stay too long. Visitors report losing track of time completely. Watches stop ticking. Phones glitch and reset. The air itself feels thick and heavy, as though pressing down on reality. And when they leave, many describe hearing the faint music still following them home, a distant calliope tune that grows softer each night until it disappears completely. Some never hear it fade. Locals have learned to avoid the place. Even the animals steer clear. Birds fly around the area, not over it. The swamp water there doesn't ripple naturally. It moves in slow, deliberate waves, as if something beneath it is breathing. In 2009, a photographer named Irene Lawson visited the site for an art project. She never returned. Her camera was found 2 weeks later by hikers, resting against a rusted fence. The photos showed something impossible: the carnival lit up, fully glowing with people walking around. But every single person in the photo had no face, just blank ovals where features should have been. And at the edge of every frame stood the Ferris wheel, turning, faintly blurred as though in motion. Authorities dismissed the photos as tampered. But the negatives told the same story. Today, the Carnival of Shadows still stands hidden in mist, humming faintly when the wind shifts. The laughter that once filled it remains, only twisted by time and decay. The horses still wait, the mirrors still whisper, and the Ferris wheel still turns slowly in the dark. They say if you drive by the swamp at midnight and turn off your headlights, you'll see the lights flicker once. And if you hear carnival music faintly behind you, don't look back. Because it's not an echo. It's an invitation. If this story made you uneasy, you're not alone, but things are about to get worse. Because our next story doesn't stay hidden in the swamps or frozen in time. It breathes inside the walls of a house that refuses to die, a home that changes for whoever enters and never lets them leave the same. Every town has that one house, the one that everyone knows but no one visits. In the quiet outskirts of Vermont, surrounded by skeletal trees and overgrown ivy, stands one such place, a pale, sprawling structure that locals call the house that remembers. It doesn't look haunted at first. Just old, its paint long stripped away, its roof sagging, the windows clouded like cataracts. But the strange thing about this house is not how it looks, it's how it changes. Because no two visitors ever describe it the same way. To some, it's a grand Victorian manor with elegant stairs and a vast library filled with dust. To others, it's a narrow farmhouse with dark corridors and walls that pulse faintly, like veins beneath the surface. But everyone agrees on one thing: the moment you step inside, the air feels wrong, heavy, watching. The first written accounts of the house date back to the 1800s, when a man named Elias Rowan built it for his wife, Margaret. They had no children, but records suggest they took in several orphans over the years. By 1889, the entire household had disappeared. Neighbors assumed they moved away. Decades later, explorers found furniture still in place, dinner plates set on the table, half-empty glasses coated in dust. The food, strangely, hadn't rotted. It had simply dried, preserved like it had been frozen in time. When a real estate agent tried to sell the property in 1910, he claimed that every time he returned, the rooms looked different. Once he found a staircase that hadn't been there before. The next day, it was gone. Another time, he swore that the wallpaper had changed color from pale blue to deep crimson overnight. He quit his job soon after and never spoke of the house again. Since then, the property has remained untouched, its doors locked, its windows shuttered. Yet somehow, it still draws people in. Paranormal investigators, historians, skeptics, they all go there searching for truth, and all of them come back changed. One of the most disturbing reports came from a research group in 1976. They entered in pairs, marking their path with chalk arrows to avoid getting lost. Within minutes, their marks began vanishing. The hallways stretched longer than they should have, and when they tried to retrace their steps, they found entirely new rooms that hadn't existed on the blueprint. A nursery filled with rotting toys. A parlor with fresh flowers that smelled too strong. A basement staircase that spiraled downward endlessly until they turned back in panic. When they finally escaped, they realized they'd only been inside for 20 minutes. Their cameras, however, showed over 7 hours of footage, most of it static, with faint whispers buried under the noise. No one could explain what the house was doing or how. But people began to notice something worse. Those who entered it carried something back with them, a weight. They complained of hearing footsteps in their own homes afterward, or seeing flashes of unfamiliar hallways in their dreams. Some woke up to find strange drawings on their walls, sketches of doors, staircases, and eyes. Locals say the house remembers everyone who enters and recreates parts of them within its walls. It doesn't haunt you. It keeps you. The few who have dared go back report seeing faint outlines of people behind the glass, not reflections, but impressions. Figures standing where no one should be, frozen mid-step. And sometimes, those shapes look eerily familiar. One woman, a photographer named Leela, captured what she thought was the perfect shot of the house at sunset. When she developed the film, there was someone standing in the attic window, wearing her clothes, holding her camera. She never returned to Vermont again. What makes the house so terrifying isn't the ghosts or the atmosphere. It's the way it feels aware. Doors open before you touch them. The floorboards creak in rhythm with your breathing. The shadows in the corners stretch and curl subtly when you move. It's as if the building itself is thinking, deciding, remembering. Some researchers have a theory that the house was built on a magnetic anomaly, a place where time folds. Others think it's alive, that every person who's ever entered has fed it in some unseen way, that every fear, every heartbeat, every memory becomes part of its structure. That's why it changes shape, because it's evolving. Those who have studied it agree on one eerie detail. The walls sometimes whisper names. Not random ones, but the names of the people who are standing inside at that very moment. There's an unconfirmed story of a man who burned the house down in the early 2000s, desperate to end the curse. The fire burned bright through the night, reducing it to ash. Yet when locals returned weeks later, the house was there again, untouched, rebuilt exactly as before, its roof gleaming with morning dew as if nothing had happened. It never truly leaves, because it doesn't exist in one time, or even one version of itself. It's a living memory of everyone it's ever consumed, and it always wants to add more. Today, the house still stands at the end of an unmarked dirt road, half hidden by fog. No address, no mailbox, just a single path leading to its porch. Travelers sometimes find it by accident, claiming they just stumbled upon it, even though maps show no structure there. And when they try to find it again, the road is gone. The house that remembers isn't just a haunted place. It's a reflection of fear, of memory, of everything that refuses to die. And if you ever find yourself standing before it, feeling like it's watching you, it probably is. Because maybe, just maybe, you've already been there before, and it's simply waiting for you to come back. If this story left your mind uneasy, prepare yourself, because what comes next will make your body tremble. Our next story takes us below ground, to a network of tunnels that stretch for miles beneath the streets of Paris, filled with millions of bones and a darkness that breathes. Beneath the cobblestone streets of a centuries-old European city lies a world forgotten by sunlight. Tourists walk above it every day, unaware that just below their feet stretches a maze of death, endless tunnels carved through bone and silence. Locals whisper that the catacombs are alive, that if you listen closely in the dead of night, the walls themselves seem to breathe. In the 1700s, when overfilled cemeteries threatened to taint the city's water supply, authorities made a chilling decision to relocate the remains of millions into the labyrinth beneath. Rows upon rows of skulls were stacked like bricks, femurs forming pillars, ribs woven into patterns that could only have been conceived by men who had long since stopped fearing death. Over time, the dead were forgotten, but the tunnels remained, stretching for miles beneath the earth, an underground necropolis that no map could ever fully capture. Centuries later, urban explorers began to seek it out. They were drawn by thrill, by legend, by the magnetic pull of forbidden history. But among them was one man who wasn't looking for adventure, he was looking for answers. His name was Elias Verdun, a historian obsessed with tracing his lineage. His great-great-grandfather had vanished somewhere in the city, rumored to have been part of the original burial relocation team. When Elias discovered an old journal passed down through his family, pages filled with strange sketches of tunnels and notes scrawled in fear, he knew where he had to go. On a cold November night, Elias found an unguarded entrance behind a derelict chapel. The air that poured out of the darkness was stale, dry, and unnervingly cold. He flicked on his flashlight and the beam caught thousands of bones, skulls grinning through the shadows, sockets hollow, watching. Every footstep echoed for eternity. He marked his path with chalk, just as the explorers before him had done, but as he descended deeper, the marks seemed to vanish behind him. The tunnels twisted in impossible ways, bending logic and direction alike. The further he went, the more the air felt wrong, thick, heavy, as if it carried centuries of whispers pressed into its breathless stillness. He began to notice something odd. The walls of skulls weren't just arranged randomly. They formed patterns, deliberate spirals and symbols that seemed to pulse when his light moved across them. In the faint glow, he could swear he saw motion, a flicker in an empty socket, a shifting of bone dust. Then came the sound. At first it was faint, like a drip, or perhaps the soft rhythm of breathing. Elias turned off his flashlight and listened. It was unmistakable now, whispering. A dozen voices, murmuring in Latin, echoing from deep within the black. His chest tightened. He tried to retrace his steps, but every turn looked the same and the air grew colder with every breath. After what felt like hours, he stumbled into a wide chamber. At its center stood a massive ossuary pillar, bones packed tightly, spiraling upward into the dark ceiling like a macabre sculpture. Beneath it lay a small altar carved from limestone, and upon it a single skull rested. Unlike the others, this one was clean, polished, and marked with carvings. Elias brushed away the dust and read the inscription. Custos Mortuorum, the keeper of the dead. Suddenly, the whispering ceased. A silence so thick it pressed against his ears. Then from the corner of the chamber, something moved, a faint scrape of bone against stone. Elias froze. His flashlight trembled as it caught a figure emerging from the shadows, draped in centuries of dust, its face hidden behind the hollow grin of a skull mask. It walked as if it had forgotten how to be human, bones creaking, a soft rattling echoing with each step. The Keeper. It stopped before him, tilting its head as though studying him. Elias wanted to speak, to plead, but the air left his lungs. The presence before him radiated an ancient, heavy sorrow. Then, in a voice that was not one but many, it spoke inside his mind. You seek the dead, yet you do not listen. Elias stumbled back, shaking. His flashlight flickered, and for a heartbeat the chamber was filled with faces, thousands of them, skulls turning toward him all at once, mouths opening in a silent scream. The floor trembled. The bones shifted. The pillar began to crumble. He ran. The tunnels twisted in madness now, paths that shouldn't exist opened before him, others closed behind. The whispering rose again, louder, furious, chasing him through corridors lined with death. He tripped, his chalk rolling from his hand. As it hit the floor, he saw the same mark he had drawn earlier was now beneath his feet. He had been running in circles. The light died. In the darkness, something cold brushed his arm, a hand of bone guiding him. He couldn't fight it anymore. He followed. The hand led him through a narrow passage that ended at a stone wall half collapsed. He clawed at it, desperate, until his fingers hit wood. A door. He pushed through it and stumbled into faint moonlight. He was back at the surface, standing in the ruins of the chapel where he'd begun. Behind him, the ground seemed to breathe. He could hear them, thousands of whispering voices, murmuring through the soil. Elias looked down and saw, burned into the dirt at his feet, the same Latin words, Custos Mortuorum. He never returned to the catacombs, but those who have ventured in since sometimes find chalk markings that don't belong to them, and a faint echo of footsteps following close behind. If this story chilled your bones, then our next tale will take you to a place far more cursed, where the dead are not buried beneath the earth, but wander above it. Deep in the heart of Eastern Europe, where the forests grow thick and ancient, there lies a road that doesn't appear on any modern map. It winds through the trees in a perfect curve, descending into a hollow where fog never lifts, a place locals warn travelers to avoid. They say if you follow that road far enough, you'll find a village that shouldn't exist. The name of that place has been lost to time. No government records, no census, no postal code. Just a scattering of decayed homes, overgrown with ivy and silence. The few who claim to have stumbled upon it describe the same things. Roofs caved in, wells filled with black water, and doors that creak open even when the air is still. They call it simply the Forgotten Village. For centuries, no one dared to settle near it. But curiosity is a hunger that devours reason. And in the early 2000s, a team of anthropology students decided to uncover the truth. They had heard rumors that the village had been wiped out in a plague, that its people had vanished overnight, leaving food still warm on their tables. They wanted proof, photographs, evidence of the stories whispered in every nearby town. Their leader was Dr. Helena Kraus, a seasoned researcher fascinated by abandoned settlements. She believed the village had been deserted during the Black Death, preserved by isolation. She convinced 4 of her students to accompany her for what was supposed to be a 2-day survey. They arrived in early autumn, the air cool and colorless, leaves turning brittle. The road leading in was so overgrown they had to continue on foot. As they moved deeper, the forest grew unnaturally quiet, no birds, no insects, only the crunch of their boots and the sound of wind pushing against nothing. And then the trees parted. The village stood before them, draped in mist. The houses were wooden, roofs bowed under centuries of decay. The well in the center square was cracked open like a wound, its stones slick with moss. It should have been beautiful in its ruin, yet it radiated unease, as if time itself had chosen to halt there for a reason. Helena raised her camera and took a photo. When the flash went off, something reflected back from one of the windows. She paused. There was no one there, just a curtain swaying slightly, though no breeze reached that deep into the hollow. They decided to split up to record notes and take pictures. Helena examined what appeared to be the old mayor's house. Inside, everything was coated in dust. A clock on the wall still hung at midnight. A dining table stood set with cracked plates, silverware turned black with age. And at the head of the table sat a chair, empty but pulled slightly back, as if someone had just stood up from it. In another house, her student Luca found a child's toy, a wooden horse, carved crudely, its eyes gouged out. He laughed nervously and put it in his pack, saying it'd make a good souvenir. Helena told him to put it back. He didn't. That night they made camp in one of the larger homes. The air inside was thick, heavy with the scent of mildew and something older, something faintly metallic. They set up lanterns and reviewed their notes. Everything seemed ordinary enough until one of the students, Myra, asked Helena if she had heard the bells. Bells, Helena frowned. Myra nodded, pale. A church bell, distant but clear. There was no church in the village, at least not one they had seen. The night deepened. The mist pressed closer against the windows, swallowing the moonlight. Around midnight, the sound began again, a soft, distant ringing that seemed to come from the woods. Luca stood, curious, and said he'd go check. Helena protested, but he laughed it off, flashlight in hand, and stepped into the fog. Minutes passed, then 20, then an hour, no sign of him. When they finally went after him, his footprints led toward the forest and stopped abruptly. The beam of Helena's light caught something on the ground, the wooden horse, half buried in mud. Its mouth was filled with teeth, human teeth. They ran. The fog thickened, curling like smoke, shapes forming within it, tall, thin, almost human. Whispers slid through the air, words in a language none of them knew. Helena's flashlight flickered, and for a heartbeat she saw them clearly. Villagers standing in the mist, faces gray, eyes hollow, mouths sewn shut with wire. Their heads turned in unison as if sensing the living. The group fled toward the square, but the path they came through was gone. The road, the forest, everything was swallowed by the fog. Houses loomed around them, shifting, stretching, closing in. Doors creaked open on their own. Something was moving inside them. Myra screamed and ran for the well. Helena turned just in time to see her fall to her knees beside it, staring into its depths. There was movement below, like shadows swirling in water. Myra leaned closer, drawn by something unseen, and before Helena could reach her, a hand shot out, gray and slick, dragging her down. Her scream vanished into the dark. The others ran blindly through the mist. One by one, the sounds of their footsteps faded, replaced by whispers, their names being called from every direction. Helena ran until her lungs burned. She found herself at the edge of the village again, though she didn't remember turning. The mist parted just enough to reveal the church. It hadn't been there before. The bell tower loomed crooked and tall, its cross rusted and broken. The door was open. Inside, rows of pews faced an altar draped in tattered black cloth. Behind it, a figure stood motionless, a priest, or what remained of one. His robes were rotting, his skin stretched thin, his face covered by a mask of bark and bone. Around him knelt dozens of villagers, motionless, their bodies mummified by time, still bound in prayer. Helena's flashlight flickered, and when it steadied, all of their heads had turned toward her. The bell rang once. Her scream echoed through the hollow. Days later, a rescue team found the students' abandoned vehicle on the forest road. The camp inside the village was empty. Only Helena's camera was recovered, its film still intact. When developed, the photos showed the village in various angles until the final frame. It was the church interior, the villagers kneeling, the priest standing. And behind the altar, staring directly into the camera, was Helena herself, eyes black, face pale, a faint smile carved across her lips. No one ever found the village again. Every attempt to retrace their route ends the same way. The road disappears. swallowed by trees that seem to grow overnight. Some say the village moves, appearing where it's least expected, calling to those who crave answers. Others say it's not a place at all, but a memory, feeding on curiosity, waiting for the next group to find it. If this story left your pulse racing, then the next one will twist your fears deeper, because sometimes the most haunted places aren't hidden at all. They're right where we live. In the heart of a restless city, where the skyline glows with restless light and the streets hum with insomnia, there stands an old high-rise that time seems to have forgotten. It isn't the tallest or the grandest, but it carries an unease that no one can quite explain. The locals call it Marrow Heights, though that name doesn't appear on any official record. Some say the building has existed since the 1940s. Others claim it was rebuilt after a fire, but no blueprints exist, and no one remembers construction ever taking place. Tenants move in, they rarely stay long. The building isn't abandoned, not exactly, but it behaves like it wants to be. Light bulbs burn out faster than they should. Elevators stop between floors. Neighbors vanish without moving trucks or goodbyes. And above all, every tenant swears the same thing. You can hear footsteps in the hallway at all hours, even when no one is there. When 28-year-old photographer Clara Finch moved into apartment 6B, she thought she'd found a hidden gem, cheap rent, city view, and walking distance to her studio. The landlord, an older man with glassy eyes, handed her the keys with an expression somewhere between pity and warning. "Keep the lights on at night," he muttered, "and don't look out the peephole after midnight." She laughed, thinking it was an old man's superstition, but laughter fades quickly in Marrow Heights. Her first night was ordinary enough. She unpacked, ordered takeout, and listened to the muffled hum of the city outside. Around 2 a.m., she woke to footsteps in the hall, slow, deliberate, measured. She assumed it was a neighbor coming home late, but the steps never reached any door. They went back and forth for what felt like an hour, stopping only when the elevator chimed softly somewhere below. The next morning, Clara mentioned it to the woman next door, a frail tenant named Mrs. Alvey who had lived there for years. The woman smiled without warmth. "They walk every night," she said, voice low. "Best not to mind them, they get louder when you do." Clara tried to laugh it off, but that night the footsteps returned louder, closer, as if packing directly outside her door. She turned off the TV and held her breath. The sound stopped. Then came a faint scratching, a slow drag of nails across the wood. Her heart pounded. She peered through the peephole. Nothing, just the empty corridor, washed in the flickering red light of the exit sign. She stepped back, exhaling shakily. And then she froze. A shadow moved under her door, something tall, something that hadn't been there a second ago. She slept with every light on until morning. Days passed. Clara tried to convince herself it was stress, new place, old pipes, city noises. But strange things began to happen inside the apartment. Her photographs shifted positions on the wall. The mirror fogged even when the air was cold. At night, she'd wake to faint whispers behind the walls, not words, but the rhythm of breathing, slow and synchronized, as though someone were standing just on the other side, listening. One evening, she came home to find her front door slightly open. Nothing was missing, but her camera, the one she always kept capped on her desk, had been used. There were fresh photos on the memory card she didn't remember taking. Her hands shook as she scrolled through them. Most were of her apartment, taken at night, while she slept. In each one, the angle changed slightly, from the doorway, from the corner, from right beside her bed. The final photo stopped her cold. It was a close-up of her face, taken inches away, her eyes half open. Behind her, in the reflection of the window, stood a figure, tall, faceless, its head tilted toward her like a curious shadow. Clara packed her things the next morning. She planned to leave, but when she reached the lobby, the elevator was broken. The stairwell door wouldn't open, jammed, sealed tight. She went to the landlord's office, but it was empty, coated in dust, as if no one had been there for years. Panic began to settle in. She wasn't trapped by locks, she was trapped by something far older. The building itself seemed to hum now, a low vibration in the floor that matched her heartbeat. The walls breathed in subtle rhythm. From the corner of her eye, she saw movement, shadows twisting where light should be. That night she stayed awake, determined to document everything. Around 3 a.m. the lights flickered and died. Only her camera's flash remained. The footsteps returned, heavy and slow. They stopped outside her door. Then came 3 knocks. She raised the camera, trembling, and snapped a photo. The flash illuminated the hallway through the peephole, empty. But when the light faded, a faint reflection glowed in the lens, a distorted face pressed against the glass, eyes wide and hollow. The camera slipped from her hand. The door creaked open by itself, revealing the corridor stretching endlessly in both directions, filled with faint, shifting figures. Their footsteps filled the air, an unending rhythm that swallowed her breath. She backed away as her apartment grew darker, the walls closing in like lungs exhaling for the last time. The next morning, apartment 6B was empty. Her furniture, her belongings, her camera, all gone. The landlord's office was still deserted. The lease file for 6B no longer existed. When a new tenant moved in months later, she found a single photograph wedged behind the radiator. It showed the apartment, same layout, same furniture, but the walls were smeared with handprints, and in the corner by the window stood a woman with a camera. Her face was blurred, but her outline was unmistakable. Clara Finch was still there. To this day, residents of Marrow Heights report seeing light flicker from apartment 6B late at night, long after it's been marked vacant. Some claim they hear the faint click of a camera shutter between the footsteps, as if someone's still trying to capture proof of the building's endless wakefulness. Because Marrow Heights never truly sleeps, it watches, it listens, and it remembers everyone who's ever stepped inside. If this story left you uneasy, wait until you hear the next one, where the haunting doesn't come from walls or whispers, but from something far more personal. On the outskirts of a small German town, where fog clings to the roofs like old lace, there stands a narrow house with boarded windows and a door that never fully closes. The locals call it the dollmaker's house. No one lives there anymore, though some claim they've seen candlelight flickering behind the curtains, a faint, trembling glow that vanishes when approached. The story begins in the late 1800s, when the town was still young and winters came hard. A craftsman named Otto Hirsch lived in that house, a quiet man, known for his extraordinary dolls. His creations were famous across the region, so lifelike that people often mistook them for sleeping children when displayed in shop windows. Each one had glass eyes so vivid they seemed to follow you wherever you went, and hair spun from fine threads that shimmered under lamplight. But Otto's talent came with tragedy. His wife, Amelia, died giving birth to their daughter, Greta, who survived only a few weeks before succumbing to fever. After their deaths, Otto changed. He stopped speaking to neighbors, closed his shop, and sealed himself inside his workshop. The windows were painted black, and strange smells began to seep from the cracks: varnish, formaldehyde, something metallic. The townspeople whispered that Otto was still making dolls, but now for an audience that no longer lived. Months passed. Then one by one, villagers began to notice something uncanny. Dolls appeared on their doorsteps at night, wrapped in cloth, eyes wide open. They were beautiful but unsettling, each one resembling a local child. Otto denied leaving them, but no one believed him. Fear spread through the town, and soon, no one dared to go near his house after dark. And then the disappearances began. At first, it was just small things: a stray cat, a missing toy. But then children started vanishing. Always the same pattern: a door left ajar, a cold breeze, and a doll found on the doorstep the next morning, dressed in the missing child's clothes. By winter's end, Otto was gone too. His house stood silent, door unlocked, fireplace cold. The villagers searched it by torchlight. Inside, they found dozens of dolls, each one posed around a long dining table as if attending a silent feast. The chairs were carved with names. Every doll's face was eerily familiar. The authorities assumed Otto had fled, leaving behind his madness. The house was sealed and forgotten, a shadow among the trees. But stories like this don't stay buried forever. More than a century later, in 2017, the house caught the attention of Alina Weiss, a documentary filmmaker specializing in historical mysteries. She'd read about the disappearances and wanted to investigate the folklore surrounding Otto Hirsch. She obtained permission from the town council to film inside for 3 nights. Alina arrived with 2 assistants, a camera, and a week's worth of supplies. The air around the house was unnaturally still, no birds, no wind, not even the hum of distant traffic. Inside, the floors creaked like sighs. Dust hung in the air like ash. The furniture was still there, untouched, cloaked in cobwebs. And in every room, dolls sat waiting, hundreds of them, perfectly preserved, arranged in neat rows facing the same direction, as if waiting for someone to speak. On the first night, Alina filmed her introduction. She spoke about the legend, about Otto's grief, and about how loss can twist devotion into horror. As she spoke, her assistant Max adjusted the lights. One of the dolls behind her tipped forward slightly. No one noticed. That night they camped in the main hall. The sound of ticking filled the house, faint but rhythmic, like dozens of tiny heartbeats. At around 3 a.m., Alina woke to a whisper. It sounded like a child humming a lullaby. She sat up, flashlight in hand, and saw movement in the doorway, a small figure darting past, its steps too light to be human. She followed. The hallway stretched longer than she remembered, walls lined with portraits of children. Their painted eyes seemed to gleam in the beam of her light. She turned a corner and froze. The door to Otto's workshop was open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of oil and rot. Workbenches were covered in tools, molds, and porcelain faces. On the far wall hung a massive glass cabinet filled with dolls, dozens of them, their eyes reflecting the flashlight. But it wasn't their beauty that froze her blood. It was their expressions. They weren't neutral. They were terrified. Alina stepped closer, noticing something behind the glass, faint outlines etched into the mirror-like surface. She wiped away dust and gasped. Each doll had a name carved below it. Some were names from the 1800s. Others were new. Her own name was among them. A sound echoed behind her, the creak of a chair, the click of tiny joints moving. She turned slowly. The dolls on the table were no longer facing forward. They had turned toward her. The next morning, Max and the other assistant found the workshop door locked from the inside. When they finally broke it open, Alina was gone. Only her camera remained, recording a static hum. The footage showed her entering the workshop, turning in panic and then freezing. Her eyes went wide and her body stiffened. The final frame captured her standing perfectly still, expression blank, before the feed cut out. They fled the house without looking back. Authorities searched for weeks but found no trace of her. The only thing left behind was a new doll on the workbench, glass eyes clear blue, hair the same shade as Alina. Today, the dollmaker's house still stands. No one dares enter, though travelers sometimes report faint lights moving behind its windows. Some claim they've heard a woman's voice humming softly from within, a lullaby that doesn't end. Those who have peeked through the cracked door say they saw the dining table set once more, with an empty chair waiting at its head. And if you look closely, you might notice a new doll among the old, one with a camera in her porcelain hands, forever staring into the lens, as if still recording from the other side. If this story left you chilled, the next will crawl deeper into the darkness, a place where time itself decays, and the living are the ones who don't belong. There are towns so small and remote that maps forget them. And then there are towns erased not by time, but by something that refuses to be remembered. Deep within the Nevada desert once stood a place called **Raventon**, a mining settlement founded in 1899. For decades, it thrived on silver, sweat, and superstition. The miners said the earth there sighed at night, that the rocks whispered. But they kept digging. Greed is louder than fear. By the 1950s, Raventon was dying. The mines were dry, the saloons empty, the last train had stopped coming. Only 50 people remained, stubborn souls who refused to leave their home, even when the ground began to crack open near the old shaft. The desert winds carried strange smells, iron, ash, something almost sweet. And sometimes at night, the sky above Raventon shimmered faintly, as if lightning were trapped inside the clouds. On the night of June 12, 1956, a storm rolled over the desert, sudden, unnatural, without rain or thunder. Just a dull, constant hum that grew louder until the earth itself vibrated. At dawn, a passing trucker reached the area where Raventon should have been. There was nothing. The road ended in a jagged cliff of sand and dust. No buildings, no people, no remains. Just the faint outline of streets, impressed into the ground like shadows burned into stone. They called it the vanishing of Raventon *, one of America's strangest disappearances. Government officials investigated, geologists searched for sinkholes, and military agents sealed off the land. But the reports were quietly buried. All that remained were whispers, and a rumor that anyone who entered the restricted zone after dark heard faint voices calling their names from beneath the sand. Half a century later, a drone hobbyist named Caleb Moore decided to explore the site. He was obsessed with places that shouldn't exist, vanished towns, blacklisted roads, anything scrubbed from history. Raventon was his obsession. He spent months analyzing declassified maps and satellite data until he found a patch of desert where the terrain looked unnaturally smooth, as if something massive lay buried just below the surface. He arrived at dusk. The air was heavy and dry, and even the insects were silent. His drone camera buzzed upward, feeding grainy footage to his tablet. For a few minutes, it showed nothing but dunes. Then something appeared, faint geometric patterns carved into the sand like foundations or streets. The outline of a church, a main road, a row of small rectangles that looked disturbingly like houses. He felt a chill. Raventon was still there, just buried. As he adjusted the drone, the live feed flickered, static. Then a frame of something impossible, a figure walking between the invisible houses. Human-shaped, shadow-thin, and moving against the wind. He froze. The feed blinked out. When it returned, the camera showed his own car from above. The driver's door was open, but he was still standing beside it, tablet in hand. The screen began to hum, that same low frequency described in the 1956 reports. He turned off the drone and stood in silence. The wind had stopped entirely. No sound. Not even his own breathing seemed to reach his ears. Then faintly, the sand shifted as if something beneath it had exhaled. Caleb's instincts told him to run, but curiosity rooted him in place. The air felt thick, pressing against his skin. His flashlight beam caught shapes in the dunes, wooden signs, half-buried fences, a window frame sticking out of the earth. He knelt and brushed the sand away, revealing the word hotel carved in faded red paint. Beneath it, the wood was warm to the touch, pulsing faintly, like something alive. Then came the whisper, soft, feminine, right behind him. "Check in, Caleb." He spun around, nothing but the dunes. When he turned back, the sand where the hotel sign had been was smooth again. No trace. But now, farther ahead, faint lights flickered like lanterns swaying in the distance. He walked toward them, drawn forward step by step. As he moved, the sand grew firmer underfoot, turning to packed dirt. The wind changed. The air smelled of coal smoke and metal. His light flickered, and suddenly, he wasn't standing in the desert anymore. He was in the middle of Raventon. The town looked exactly as it must have decades ago: wooden storefronts, gas lamps, signs for the saloon and post office, but everything was motionless. The lamps burned without smoke. No sound of wind, no voices, just the faint hum that came from everywhere and nowhere. He stepped forward, heart pounding. His boots echoed like they were inside a cavern. A newspaper drifted across the street and stopped at his feet. The date read June 11, 1956. He tried to scream, but his voice came out soundless. The horizon pulsed, and the world dimmed as if the sun were a dying bulb. Then from the corner of his eye he saw them, the townspeople. Dozens of them standing perfectly still in the street, heads bowed, eyes closed. Dust covered their faces like masks. He took a step back and their heads lifted in unison. Their eyes opened hollow, gray, flickering like ash. They didn't move, but their mouths opened as one. The hum grew louder, shaking the air. The ground beneath him began to vibrate, the street cracking open. From below, something glowed, molten orange, breathing heat like a living thing. He realized the truth too late. The mine had never collapsed. It had been sealed. And whatever they found down there, the town had fed it until it fed on them. The townspeople began to sink slowly, their feet melting into the ground like wax into flame. Their mouths stretched wide, wider, until the hum turned into a scream. Caleb tried to run, but the earth opened beneath him, swallowing the street, the houses, the sky. His drone, still recording from above, captured the last frame, a ripple spreading through the sand where he'd stood, and then silence. Days later, a search team found his car near the site. Inside was his drone controller, still connected. The footage was grainy, but experts noticed something odd. Just before the feed cut, you could hear faint music, like an old radio playing through the static. A man's voice, faint and distant. "Welcome back to Raventon. Population growing." The government closed the area again, citing unstable terrain. But travelers say that on moonless nights, when the desert wind dies completely, lights flicker in the dunes, forming a perfect outline of a town that shouldn't exist. If you follow those lights long enough, the sand beneath your feet begins to tremble, softly at first, then stronger, like something far below is waking up again. And that's where our journey ends. 10 forgotten places, 10 echoes of the abandoned, the cursed, and the erased. Maybe these places were never truly empty. Maybe they're still waiting, not for the living, but for those who dare to remember them. Because some towns die quietly. Others just stop letting you leave. And that ends our descent into the world's most haunted, abandoned places. But remember, some doors never stay closed. If these tales sent chills down your spine, hit subscribe, tap like, and join us again, because the next story might be closer than you think. Sleep well, if you can.